Last week, Rabbi, we started doing the Aseres HaDibros and the contrast between the two sets. The first Aseres HaDibros and the second Aseres HaDibros. And the point that's most obvious, that you see right away, is the fact that when it comes to the first three Dibros, which are about Emuna, there's very, very little difference between what we call Tzadik and Baal Tshuva. But the difference in the first set and the second set is that the first set is the Madrega of Tzadik. Jewish people were perfect. They hadn't sinned yet. And the second set, after they did Tshuva. And in the later Dibros, you have a number of different distinctions, some small, some big. It separates the two sets of Dibros. But in the first three, you have a difference of one vav. That's it. Otherwise, they're exactly the same. Right? Or kol temuna. Otherwise, they're identical. So here's what's for us to discuss. Why, when it comes to Emuna, are there no differences between Tzadikim and Baalei Tshuva? And when it comes to Shabbos, when it comes to Kibbutz Avayim, there are all kinds of differences. Right. But let's talk about it. We're going to talk about the difference between a Tzadik and a Baal Tshuva and Emuna, and then you'll decide yourself. It's so easy to understand the fact that there's no difference between them when it comes to these inyanim. Let's start with this question. What is the difference between a tzaddik and a Baal Tshuva when it comes to Emuna? I'm going to give you the two sides of the coin. You tell me if you agree or disagree, okay? A tzaddik's Emuna is easier. A Baal Tshuva's Emuna is more strugglesome. It's harder. Alternatively, a tzaddik's Emuna is more complicated. A Baal Tshuva's Emuna is more simple. I just made two statements, and if you're listening, they are, at least to some degree, opposites. They're incompatible. They're different points of perspective. I'll say it one more time. A tzaddik's Emuna is simpler and easier. A Baal Tshuva's Emuna is a much greater struggle. A tzaddik's Emuna is much more sophisticated. It's much fancier. And a Baal Tshuva's Emuna is much simpler. You hear the two differences? Huh? I'm going to repeat it one more time, but I'll say it in a different form. A tzaddik's Emuna is simpler and more complex. A Baal Tshuva's Emuna is more strugglesome, but more simple. You see what I'm saying or not? Tzadikim are closer to the Eibishter. Or to say it in plain English, Tzadikim's closeness to the Eibishter is because of the Eibishter, not because of them. Hashem made some people that He's close to them. And any person that the Eibishter made that He's close to Him, obviously they're going to be close in turn. But that closeness is from heaven. The Eibishter made Tzadikim closer to Him. But the Tzadikim's natural closeness to the Eibishter, because of the Eibishter's closeness to them, has a downside. And the downside is that Tzadikim get fancy. You know what get fancy means? They try to understand. You know what trying to understand means? They try to put themselves into the picture of their relationship with Hashem. What's the classic mashal? And it's going to come up in today's class a little later again. What's the classic mashal for a tzaddik's Emuna? The Srafim. You ever heard of the Srafim? Yeah? When do you hear the Srafim? Every day. The Srafim are the Malachim from Olam Abriya. What do they say? Finver. Kadesh, Kadesh, Kadesh. Holy, holy, holy. Now here's my question. Either one holy is enough or three holies are not enough. Why are they saying holy, holy 3 times? Say it again.
Like holy, holy, etc., etc., etc.
So 2 is enough.
They died too quickly.
I need to tell you something. There was a guy in 770 years ago who was a biker. At one point they had to kick him out actually. But he would come at the 770 and daven in English. A biker. And he came into shul every day, and someone put film on him, and he would read from the English, so he had his whole seder. He was one of these very simple man, but he was very, very sure of himself. Everything had to be his way. And when he got in 770, he would answer Kedusha to, I don't know how many Kedushas. I'd say, holy, 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 the Lord of hosts fills heaven and earth, or something like that. Blessed be the glory of the Lord from His place. He would read the English, but say a lot, holy, 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 Kaddish, Kaddish, Kaddish. There was nothing in my life more holy than that guy screaming, holy, holy, holy. It was so beautiful, so sincere, so beautiful. Why do you think a malach, a sort of, says holy, holy, holy 3 times? The answer to that question, Rabbi is because the malach in his mind is 3 steps away from the Eibishter. Holy is 3 steps away from the Eibishter. Holy, holy, holy. For a Kabbalist keeping score at home, Malchus of Atzilus, Midas of Atzilus, and Bina. To him, Bina is God. Because he was an Elam Abriya, and the source of Elam Abriya is Bina of Atzilus. And in his mind, in his understanding, the Srafim would say, holy, 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 because the Eibishter is 3 steps away from that. Now, what's the big problem? The Eibishter is not on a step. I told you the story that happened to me. I told it to me or not? I told you the Maisa. Many years ago, at least 25 years ago, I had 1 year, where maybe not, around 25 years ago, where I taught Chassidus here in Yeshiva downstairs, Tom Chetmimim, and they got Rabbi Elokim to come at night to give them Chassidus classes. So I taught them in the morning, and Rabbi Elokim taught them at night. So Rabbi El used to call me his co-mashpia. He gave them a test and he wanted me to sit in on the test. He said, "Do mashpia." I remember thinking to myself, like, exactly, right? Me and Rabbi El. It's not exactly like the Srafim and the Eibishter, but it's, you know what I'm saying? Anyway, so it was an opportunity. I had opportunity to speak to him. I asked him, he told me some very interesting things. I had more than one occasion, but Rabbi El shared things with me privately and personally. But I made a chart for the Chevra that year of I don't know what. And I gave it to Zalmi Barris. Is he here? Mendy Levy's here? Mendy Barris was a student. Zalmi Barris, the holy Zalmi Barris, Olav Hashem was my student. And I asked him to show this chart to Rabbi Yael and to get his Mavinus on it. I made a chart to say to the Shtalshalus. And on top of the chart I wrote God, and then one Madreg of godliness, another Madreg, whatever, a whole business. So Zalmi showed it to Rabbi Yael, and he didn't tell Rabbi Yael that I asked. He just asked him curiously, what do you think about this chart? And Rabbi Yael answered very plainly, God is not a level. He doesn't belong on a chart. Hashem is at the highest point of a chart. Hashem is not on the chart. Hashem is the whole chart, middle, top, bottom, inside, outside, none of it, all of it, and that's it. And it was a wonderful lesson for me. The Srafim are so smart, they start to understand the Eibishter. The minute they're trying to understand the Eibishter, it's not the Eibishter they're understanding their personal Eibishter, their source. So they say holy, holy, holy 3 times because they're so smart, and they see between themselves and their source, which is Bina Vatzilus, 3 levels. But the God to which they're relating is not God at all, it's godliness. They fan him, they don't have such fancy arrangements with the Eibishter, they just scream loud and clear, Baruch Hashem. They don't understand what the Eibishter is. Wherever you are, Baruch Hashem Elokecha. And Chassidus points out that the Eifanim's simplicity, the Eifanim's pashtus, is closer to the truth than the Srafim's fanciness. You can make a similar distinction between a Tzadik and a Baltshuva. Tzadikim have an easy time with the Emuna because the Eibishter gave it to them, but Tzadikim also use their mind. And because they use their mind, their relationship with the Eibishter is based on their understanding. Which means that they're not understanding the Eibishter, they're understanding the Eibishter to the extent that their brain can get it. The Baltshuva has a much harder time with the Emuna because he has the Yetzer Hara. Right? He has the Yetzer Hara, he struggles. But the God to whom he relates is the God of the little child. Like it says in Helik Sforim, the mind of the child. And the God of the little child, that's the true God. So when you think about how different the Tzadik's Emuna is from the Baltshuva's Emuna is, it becomes very, very, very powerful that in the 10 Commandments they get exactly the same instructions. When you understand that the Tzadik has an easier time with relation with Eibishter, but because it's fancy, we're not so sure what he's relating to. And the Baltshuva has a much harder time with his Emuna, but because it's simple, he's relating to Atzma Ein Sof. It is truly extraordinary that the Eibishter gave one set of commandments when it comes to Emuna to the fancy, easy time Tzadik and to the strugglesome, simple Baltshuva. The message is the same for both of them. Both to the Tzadik who thinks he understands and to the Baltshuva who knows he doesn't understand, the Eibishter says the same thing. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Aseres HaDibros Yisro. And we're going to talk about this. I gave you the sheet, right? So when we get to the 4th commandment, or when we get to the 2nd commandment, and we get to that one vav, where the difference is. We'll talk about the difference between the two versions, but right now we're going to go through the first 3 dibros. I did not prepare all 3, I didn't have enough time, but I'll do whatever I can and talk about how Hashem says the same words to people who are so different in their relationship with Him. So of course you guys are all big masters of Hasidus, you're all experts and scholars and geniuses and studious ones. So you all know the whole discussion about Anochi and Hashem and Elokecha. What is Anochi and Hashem and Elokecha? Anochi is a word that's not holy. Anochi is a common word. Anochi could mean I. I meaning a jalob like Yossi Paltiel. Anybody could be Anochi. And the Eibishter starts the Aseres HaDibros with the word I. So Chassidus explains, and you've come across this, I'm sure, that the names of Hashem are descriptions. The names of Hashem describe. When you want to talk to Hashem that's above a description, there's no word for it. So you use borrowed words, you use made up words. If you want to describe Hashem be'emes, you do not use a holy name of Hashem, because the holy names of Hashem are similar to the Seraphim's Kodesh, 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 their definitions. So the names of Hashem are describing Elokus and Sfiris, in the Ishtalshlos as we call it. When you want to talk about the Eibishter like a child, you just say the word Meidani lefanecha, to you. Like the Rabbi used to always discuss, little children, what do they call the Eibishter? The Eibishter, right? If you go into 10 different communities, in one community, what is the word that they use for God? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Go to another community, what they use for God is Rebbeinu Shalom. Go to the third community, what they use for God is Hashem. Go into the fourth community, what they use for God, Borei Olam, the creator of the world, and so on, right? What's the word in the bondage? The one above. So the Rebbe says, you know what your Eibishter is? The guy lives above you in your apartment. That's the Eibishter. If you live on the first floor, in the second floor, the guy above you is Eibishter. He's higher than you. But you know that above the Eibishter there's another Eibishter. And above that Eibishter is an Eibishter of Eibishters. Eibishter, 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 Eibishter. The word Eibishter simply means the one above. Says that Rebbe, little children, when they say Eibishter, they imagine the guy on the second floor. But that they imagine above the guy on the second floor, the guy on the third floor. And they develop in their mind the idea that the Eibishter is above all the aboves. That's all. So Eibishter doesn't tell you what Hashem is. It just tells you that He's higher. So the Rebbe says Chassidim use the term Eibishter because it's actually the best way to relate to Hashem, because you're not saying what He is. You're just saying whatever I know, He's higher. And that's Anochi. Anochi means I. But Anochi is it's not a Shem Kodesh, it's not a holy name of Hashem. It's a name which anybody could use to mean themselves. It's a simple word that's applied to Hashem, because when Hashem wants to talk to us, like we're little children, He doesn't say a holy name, He says I, Anochi. And of course Chassidus explains, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. The Eibishter who's higher than a name comes down into Shem Havaya, which is Ein Seif, which comes down into Elokecha. Now Chevra, does anybody know the difference between the word Elokim and the word Elokeinu? Does anybody know the word Elokim and the word Elokeinu? Anybody? Chassidus. I mean, the translation Elokim means God, and Elokeinu means our God. But in the Maimonides Chassidus, they're translated as opposites. Elokim means the God of concealment. Elokeinu means the God of personalization. Elokeinu means Elokim means Hashem is hiding. Elokeinu means Hashem who's made tailored for me. And that's Anochi, Hashem that's higher than a name. Havaya, that comes out into Ein Sof. Elokecha is my personal God. He's your personal God. He's our personal God. Chassidus makes a very, very big deal out of the word Elokeinu. I take taxis in Crown Heights, but in taxi cabs that I take in Crown Heights, I get the United Nations, you know. I get every single country in the planet, including some Jews from Israel, or actually some Haimis from Brooklyn also drive cabs for Uber when they have extra time and buy extra cash. So I was driving up Troy Avenue with an African American and African Caribbean from the Caribbean islands. Doesn't matter which one. So I mentioned God to him, so he says to me, which God? The God of the Jews? I'll never forget his reaction. I said to him, there is only one God. And he got very excited. He says, you mean the God I worship is the same God you worship? I said, of course. You mean I worship the God of the Jews? I said, of course, only one God. It doesn't belong to us, it belongs to everybody. He was like, I mamish took him, he was so happy to hear that the God he worships, same God I worship, it was like to him a big chiddush. He was delighted that a Jew told him that he worships the same God that a Jew worships. But there's a difference still. Goyim don't say our God, they say God. Jewish people say our God, Elokeinu. I've told this to you before. In my fantasy, when Moshiach is going to come, and even before hopefully, not chas v'shalom the Moshiach should be delayed, but the way things are right now, we're going to have to make a siddur for Goyim. Now, when Goyim are going to daven, we're going to have to write prayers for them, whether they say them in Hebrew or not, but they're going to have to be Jewish prayers. I think the perfect prayer for Goyim to say is Asher Yotza. Think about it. It's a prayer about biology, about nature. But when Goyim refer to Hashem, they'll never say Shem Havaya. Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, they'll never say Shem Havaya. And even when they'll say Elokim, they're never going to say Elokim. In my imaginings, the Goyim are going to have Yom Kippur. They're probably the same Yom Kippur as we have, because you're not going to make new holidays. And maybe like in the holiest day of the year, when we scream 3 times, Hashem Elokim, Hashem Elokim, the Goyim will say Elokeinu. Today is mine. Jews personalize God. We make God our own. Now, Alter Ben Tanya raises that question. Who do we think we are to personalize God? And he says, Kamei Elokei Avraham. Avraham Avinu said Elokei Avraham, the God of Abraham. But Avraham deserved it. How come Avraham deserved it? He gave his life for that God. He dedicated every moment of his life to disseminating Lefarsim Shmei Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'fi Kol Eiva V'Shav. Avraham Avinu dedicated his life to teaching about Hashem. He has a right to say Elokei Avraham. But how come we have a right to say Elokei Yisro, Elokeinu, Elokai, my God, our God? And the answer is because by us it's a Yerusha. We don't have a right. We don't deserve it. We inherited it. And in the Aseres HaDibros, Hashem says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, your personal God. And I'm sure you've heard the famous Torah that it's written in Lashon Yachid. It's written in singular. It doesn't say Anochi Hashem Elokechem, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. So Rashi says this is an excuse. That if a Jew doesn't have Eidah, the Eibush says, I told you not to do it, the Jew's going to say, excuse me, you spoke only to Moshe Rabbeinu. You said it in singular. Lo ysignoiv, not lo ysignoivu. Lo yisirzach, not lo tirtzachu. All the 10 commands were given in Lashon Yachid. He spoke only to Moshe. I happened to be witness to what happened, but you weren't talking to me. You were talking to him. But of course, Chassidus says the Eibush spoke in Lashon Yachid because it's personalized. Hashem speaks each to individually. Anochi, I, above a name. Havayu, who is Ein Safe, is your personal God. Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Asher tzisicha me'eretz Mitzrayim. He took you out of the land of Mitzrayim, of narrowness. That's the translate Mitzrayim. And there's a very, very important idea in Chassidus with the word Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is a geographical spot on the map. We know where it is. It's northeast Africa, right? That's where Mitzrayim is. But Mitzrayim is an idea. Mitzrayim is the idea of narrowness, limitation. Mitzrayim is all narrowness. And Hashem took us out of narrowness and limitation. So what does Chassidus say? When you go out of narrowness and limitation, what happens? Anybody? You have a new narrowness on a higher level. When you go out of that narrowness, there's an even newer narrowness on a higher level. Do you ever finish? When you go out of one limitation, so you're free from yesterday's limitation, but you have a limitation today. And if you go out today's limitation, you're going to have a limitation tomorrow. If you go out tomorrow's limitation, it never finishes. Mitzrayim goes on. The greatest person is stuck in some way on some level. That's what the meaning of the word Mitzrayim. The Eibush says, I took you out of Mitzrayim. I don't just mean the physical and geographical Egypt. It means the philosophical concept of being stuck in any way, shape, or form. And this, Rabbi say, is why you say the very same words to the biggest Tzadik and the very same words to the simplest Baal Tshuva. Because the Tzadik's Mitzrayim is that he thinks he has God figured out. The Baal Tshuva's Mitzrayim is that the Yetzer Hara doesn't leave him alone. And it's the same Anochi Hashem Elokecha who takes the Tzadik out of his Mitzrayim and takes the Baal Tshuva out of his Mitzrayim, and that's why it says the same words. They're very different Mitzrayims. Everybody's in a different narrow space. But everybody's got their stuckness. The Tzaddik is stuck in the fact that he thinks he understands, And when you think you understand, the Eibishter to which you relate is the Eibishter of your understanding and not higher. The Baal Tshuva doesn't have those problems. The Tshuva has the basic problems of Yetzer Hara that harasses him and bothers him and raises him up and confuses him and distracts him and befuddles him and bewilders him and makes him crazy. And he has to go out of his Mitzrayim. That's another idea. But the words, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Aseres Mitzrayim, speaks to all of them. The Tzadik's Mitzrayim, Hashem has to remove us from. The Baal Tshuva's Mitzrayim, Hashem has to remove us from. And Hashem takes everybody out of their Mitzrayim, no matter what level you're on. So it's the same words, spoken to different kinds of people in very different kinds of ways. The Tzadik's Mitzrayim is, he thinks he's so great, and I don't mean this in a negative way, I mean this in the realistic way, that he thinks he's getting close to God. You understand? Maybe just to remind him, excuse me, sir, your idea that you're close to God is a Mitzrayim, and you have to go out of it. You have to appreciate the idea that you're far away from the Eibishter. The Baal Tshuva's Mitzrayim is at the Yetzer Hara, but the words are the same. So Chassidus says, and I can't believe this, but Chassidus says it, when Moshiach comes, there'll be no more Mitzrayim. When Moshiach comes, Hashem is going to remove narrowness and limitation in the kind of way that no person can have any obstacles, any blockages to growth. It doesn't mean we're all going to be infinite. It's going to mean, however, that the blockages, the stucknesses that we get into, whether we're Tzadikim and our stuckness is because we're fancy, or about Teshuva and our stuckness is because they have Yetzer Hara, the Eibush is going to give us the koyach to go out of any limit. It's just up to us. And those are the first words of the first commandment. Hashem comes down from the level of Anochi, the level of Avai, to be our personal God, to take us out of our personal Egypt. And we talked about this last week. We talk about it all the time. When a person is trapped in a klipa, in whatever the klipa is, we talk always about the 12 steps, but whatever trap a person is in, and a person successfully leaves that entrapment, there's an incredible joy. I spoke about it in Seder class. There's an unbelievable joy. There's nothing more satisfying and rejoicing than a person who is trapped in a limitation of klipa, who exceeds it. And that's the meaning of the words, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Now, what about the last words in the pasuk? Mibeis avod, from the house of bondage. Mibeis avod, from the house of bondage. Actually, it's a very funny thing. What is the meaning of Mibeis avodim? Says Rashi, we were slaves to Panai, and not a slave of slaves. We were slaves to the Pharaoh. We were not slaves of slaves. From the house of slavery. Whose slaves were we? We're the slaves of a king. And we know, which says in the Gemara, that Eved Melech Melech, when you're a slave of a king, you're like a king. But when you're a slave of a king, it's not the Eibishter, it's a form of slavery. When you're a slave of a king and the king is the Eibishter, it's the maximum freedom. And this is a very, very important idea to think about and to consider in human experience. If you work for a boss of any type, you have to do what he wants, according to his rules, according to his timetable. And when you work for a boss of any type, part of your job is not to threaten him. It's not to make the boss feel uncomfortable that you're, let's say, better than him at what he does. So if you work for a boss, it's inevitable that having a boss means you're being inhibited by the fact that there's somebody above you. Any person who's been employed knows this. Having somebody for whom you work doesn't only mean you have to do what he wants, it also means you can't be too good at it, because you don't want to threaten him. So when you are working for any kind of an employee, it holds you back, which is why some people get crazy having bosses. They can't deal with it. They can only work for themselves. The only problem is they don't know how to work for themselves because they're not masudid, not organized, right? So they end up without a job. But when they work for somebody else, the boss inhibits them. The only exception to that rule, and I'll give it to you in language you can understand, if your boss is the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Rebbe has very strict rules. But the nature of his bossism is that he gives you enormous freedom. It doesn't hold you back, it actually opens you up. You work for him, but in working for him you become freer. Why? Because it's not about him at all. It's only about you. He's not inhibited, he's not afraid that you're going to be more successful than him. It's not a concern at all. And this is a mashal. And the nimshah, like it says in Chazal, it says in Pikiyavis, Ein lach ben choyrin al mi she'esek, but you want to be free? Work for God. When you work for Hashem, you are free. Usually when you have a boss, it inhibits, it imprisons. When your boss is the Eibishter, it frees you, because the Eibishter's relationship with us is such, he makes many rules, he expects us to follow, but in creating those rules and in making us follow, he's creating a framework into which we can become the best person in the world. He gives us all the freedom to develop all parts of ourselves that without his bossery, we wouldn't be able to achieve. And that's what the word Mibeis Avodah mean. From the house of Avdos, you're slave to Panai. You work directly for the king. But if your king is not the Eibishter, the king of all kings, that slavery holds you back. As opposed to if you're a slave to the Eibishter, then being a slave of the Eibishter is emancipating, it's liberating. That's the first pasuk of the Aseres HaDibros. Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Hashem takes out of all limitation. And Hashem takes out of limitation of working for a boss, even if that boss is a king. Because unless your boss is the king of all kings, your boss holds you back. And again we repeat, the part of this pasuk which is so interesting is that you say the Tzadik and the Baal Teshuva have the exact same words. The Tzadik is being taken out of his limitations of thinking he has the Eibush to figure it out. The Tzadik is being taken out of the idea that he's serving Hashem in a way which is connected to Panai, which inhibits, and he's serving the Eibush. The Baal Teshuva has a whole different journey. But the words are the same. The message is the same. Hashem says, I took you out of the idea of you working for anybody else. If I may use these words, I took you out of the idea of working for me through an intermediary, working directly for me. And in you working directly for me, whether you're the biggest tzaddik, who has the easiest time of it, whose problem is that you think you're close to God, or you're the biggest Baal Teshuva, who has the hardest time of it, who has no problem imagining that he's close to God, but is pushing a hard time doing the right thing, Hashem has given both of them freedom using identical language. Go ahead. I need to know your name. Chaim Zev. Chaim Zev.
No, just remind me of a story, a small story, quickly. So, I think she was a therapist. She asked Rabbi Salvichik, how come in Judaism there's this aspect of fearing Hashem? Fear creates emotion, negative emotion.
Right.
And he answered, when you fear God, you don't fear anything else. So when you're emancipated, when you have Hashem.
I want to know, how did that therapist respond to that answer? It's delightful. It's a beautiful answer. But the therapist is supposed to say, Rabbi, you don't really mean that. Rabbi, you don't really mean that. Huh? The stories never continue. It's a good story. It's a very good story. It's actually a beautiful story. It's a very, forgive me for saying it, a very chassidish story. I once met a big Litvak, and we talked about Rabbi Miller. I think Rabbi Miller was a very special man. So I made the terrible mistake of saying that Rabbi Miller was a very chassidish yid. He said, excuse me, he was a sworn Litvak. I couldn't explain to him that when I said he was a chassidish yid, I was only saying something positive. And it didn't work out so good. It didn't work out. I couldn't explain it to him. Anyway, the Rabbi had got a chassidish and chush. Rabbi Avigdor Miller, I have a friend of mine who's a Miller from his mother's side. And he showed me a picture from 1924. The whole Miller family is sitting there. Rabbi Miller is already adult at that point, sitting in the picture, and he's so clearly out of place. 1924, the Friedrich was a Rebbe for 4 years living in the Star of Russia. Rabbi Miller went to learn the Mir before the Holocaust. Rabbi Miller spoke in his home to his children in Yiddish. Rabbi Miller was a very unusual man. He was such a Litvak. He was a misnagid in his character. He was everything about him was misnagdish. He didn't hate anybody. He didn't know how to hate. If you made a mistake, he criticized you. He didn't care for you or God. He was not responsible from anybody. Rabbi Miller was the mistake to do with him, because if he did something wrong, he told you off, even if you were the so-called Gadol Ador. On the other hand, he once got up at a convention from Agudas Yisrael and went on and on and on about Lubavitch and their work. Last time they let him speak, because it's against the protocol. Now I'll speak about Lubavitch in a nice way. Rabbi Miller didn't have a misnagdish bone, didn't have a hateful bone in his body. He was a very tough guy.
Where is he from?
America. He's a self-made man.
Like where in America? Like
New York someplace. Rabbi Miller, I saw a biography of his, went to his chuppah with a prayer on his lips. that one of his children should be a Shem Shabbos. That's how long ago he got married. He lived into his 90s. He was a very special person. He met the Rebbe many times. He was a real Litvak, but he was a Chassidish Yid. What can I tell you? He was a Chassidish Yid. He was doing Kiruv in the 50s. The 50s. He wrote books in English. Avi Miller. Very special Jew. And very unusual man. But if you did something against halacha, he didn't care if you were. He would stand up and say it out loud, and you would say, "Excuse me, Derech say no." But he was one of those people. He said what had to be said, whenever had to be said. He had no fear of anybody. He was married before the Fiedeke came here, for sure. I had an uncle who told me he called him the Mashgiach. He was the Mashgiach in Kai Berlin. The Mashgiach. Anyway, why did Miller come up? Oh, because it was a Chassidish Yid. He was like a Chassidish Yid. But he was in every way a misnagid. He was square. He wasn't. But he was such a genuine Yid. He was a Jew till his core. Anyway, I digress. Next pasuk. Lo yilcha Elokim Acheirim Panai. You're not allowed to have Elokim Acheirim Panai. Here, of course, the whole world goes like this and Chabad goes like that. Why? Anybody? Because we have to go different. You were saying, what? How are we different than the whole world in this pasuk? Lo yilcha Elokim Acheirim Panai. Anybody know? Huh? Making me nervous. One of your names is Binyamin, the other one is Moshe. Slapochnik. It's Binyamin Moshe. I'm good today. So don't mess with me now, man. How do the whole world read this pasuk, and how does Chabad read this pasuk? Lo yilcha Elokim Acheirim Panai. Number 2. They say Elohim, and we say Elokim. Why do they say Elohim? Because other gods you're allowed to call God. Elokim Acheirim means other gods. When you say other gods, you're allowed to say Elohim. It's not Hashem's name. I spent the first 2 years of my Achei years in Muncie, in Beis David Yeshiva, in 1970 and 71, I guess, a while ago. I had Halakha teachers, Rabbi Bayer and Rabbi Weinstein, Aleichem Shalom. And when we were little kids, they taught us Elohim. And I remember getting such a kick of saying Hashem's name, So I would go home to my sister and I would say Elohim, and she'd get very nervous. And no, I'm allowed to say it because I said before. Kids play games. We'd say Shema Yisrael quietly and say Hashem's name loud and get everybody upset. There was a whole spiel. So we said Elokim. So this was the games we played as children. Of course you did. These were our games. We never didn't have Nintendo and Achei's bus. But the Welt sagt Elohim, lo yilach Elohim Acheirim. Chabad says Elokim. Why? And there's an answer, which is in Tanya and Chav Beis, Tanya chapter 22, which we had not long ago in Chitas. Today, what do we do today? We started Achei, right? Yes, there was a whole Chav Dalet. This is Chav Beis, a couple of prakim ago. That it says in Chasidus that Elokim Acheirim means Hashem Acheirim with his back turned. Elokim Acheirim means other gods on a halachic level, on a nigla level. On a spiritual level, Elokim means the Eivishter when he turns his back. Acheirim is Meloshan Acheirim, K'man Deshodah Basakasvel Esedi Shalei B'Tzenei. Shemachas Eponim B'Menim Esidos Yesei. If there's someone you can't stand, but you have to give him money, or you have to give him food, you have to give him sustenance in some way, so you do it. But you do it with no love. So you literally or figuratively or both turn your back. You give it to him. Here, Nem. I'm not going to give you a smile. I'm not going to give you what the halacha calls mefaisei. You give him what you have to give him, and that's it. Elokim Acheirim, we say Elokim Acheirim, not Elohim Acheirim, because the Tanya explains that Elokim means the Eibishter with his back turned. And the source of Avodah Zarah is Elohim. The source of Elohim Acheirim is Elokim Acheirim. The beginning of the idea that people can imagine and think that there's Chas v'Shalom, another power in the universe, besides for the Eibishter himself, is the fact that the Eibishter hides. And because the Eibishter sometimes, to some people, in some conditions, turns his back, they develop the idea that maybe the Eibishter is not the only guy running the show, there's people helping him, and that becomes Elohim Acheirim. So you're not allowed to have an idea that the Eibush has turned his back. Because if you have an idea that the Eibush has turned his back, you're going to end up with the idea that the Eibush is out of control. That's where it starts. It starts with Elokim Acheirim. And it ends up in Elohim Acheirim. I'm sorry?
We believe in Hashem's hiding. Thank God.
So the idea is you have to never, in your own mind, you are never in your own mind able to say, like Cain said, when the Eibush did not take his korban, very famously he said, Les din v'les dayin v'salma da'asi. There's no judgment, and there's no elam haba. Hashem didn't take his korban. And his reaction was, Hashem's not paying attention. Not there's something wrong with my korban, he's not paying attention. That's Elokim Acheirim, and that's the beginning of Elohim Acheirim, you see? So we're focusing on the Sheder Shemacher, and they're focusing on the Tetzah. You're never allowed to say the Eibush is not watching. You're never allowed to say the Eibush is not involved. You're never allowed to say the Eibush turned his back. Because saying that the Eibush turned his back is the beginning of saying that the Eibush is not the only Balabais of the world. There's Elokim Acheirim, Elohim Acheirim, there's other gods. Al Panai, I love this. Al Panai. What's Al Panai mean? On my face. To my face. Now, I love to say this because I love to say it. It's one of those things that just, for some reason, works for me. When you look in the Rishonim and Ramban, I'm talking about Mekubalim Rishonim, Ramban, Rabbi Bechai, and others, and they talk about Al Panai, they translate the face of Hashem as Malchus of Atzilus. Or to say it in other words, they translate the face of Hashem as a mask which is hiding. Just like you look at a person's face, and the person's face, especially the forehead and the cheeks where there's no hair, you cannot see what's going on inside. You look at a person's face, you know nothing about that person. Upon it means Hashem is wearing a mask. You shouldn't have other gods. Even when you look at the face of God, then to you it seems that he's hiding from you. Then you get to Chassidus, and Chassidus takes the same face of God that the Rishonim make it into Malchus of Atzilus, and they make it into Atzmos Amhus. What does Chassidus say about Panim? I'm learning a Maimed that I'm going to teach this week in Mitzvah Hashem, based on this idea that Panim means Chochma Sodom Toir Panav. When you look at a person's face, you see everything about him. Two people look at another person's face. I told it to you in the story about the Rebbe doing this. One person looks at a person's face and he sees nothing. Another person looks at a person's face and sees everything. You should have no other God when you're looking at the face of God. One person looks at the face of God and he sees the Eibishter himself. Another person looks at the very same face of God and he sees the concealment. And I'll give it to him in plain English. You live in a world of Teva, no miracles. But they collected the garbage in the morning. You understand? There's water in your pipes, there's air to breathe. There's not anarchy and violence in the streets. And you don't see God. Because this is nature, this is civics, this is our wonderful mayor and our governor and our president this one's out to lunch, this is out to supper, this is not even sure what he's out to, but they're all out. The Eibishter makes miracles every day. And you see these miracles all around yourself. And you don't see anything. You see nature. That's our point. Looking straight at the Eibishter and you see concealment. So you should have another God when you're looking straight at the Eibishter's face. And one person looks straight at the Eibishter's face, he sees the Eibishter himself. Another person looks at the very, very same face and sees a mask. Hashem is hiding. Do not allow yourself to entertain the idea that the Eibishter has turned his back. Because if you allow yourself to entertain the idea that Hashem turns his back, you're going to allow yourself to entertain the idea Chas v'Sholom, that there's another God. Al Panai, when you're looking straight at Hashem and you don't see nothing because your eyes are closed. Like the story I told you where the woman tells the Rebbe should reveal himself, so the Rebbe went like this. But in the Rashi, there's a very interesting nuance in the word Al Panai. In Parshas Yossi it says Al Panai, Kol Zman Shani Kayim, all the time that I'm alive. In Vaeschanan it says Al Panai, Kol Mokem Shani Kayim, all places where I'm alive. And then in Parshas Vaeschanan, Rashi says Davar Acher Kol Zman. And you read these, and Rashi say, what? In our Parshas Yossi it says you're not allowed to have another God. Al Panai means at all time. In Parshas Vaeschanan it says Al Panai in all space. And then he says davar acher, also all time. So my question to you is, Tzadikim are more concerned with time and Bali Tshuva are more concerned with space? Does that make sense? To the Tzadik you say, Lo yilcha Elokim Acheirim Panai kol zman shani kayim, all time. To the Bal Tshuva you say, Lo yilcha Elokim Panai kol makom shani kayim. What's the spiel? What's the shtick? Anybody? Look it up. Don't believe me? Never believe me. But also it says, Kol zman shani kayim, v'os chazal chol makom. What's this business? It's a great question. How come we never noticed? And the answer to the question, of course, is I don't know. But according to Hasidus, time is higher than space. And time being higher than space has a number of factors, and most importantly is we have far less control over time than we have over space. You cannot speed time up, you cannot slow time down, and you cannot travel backwards in time. Space is not nearly as inhibiting. If you're in one place, you're not in another place. But you can get on a faster plane or on a rocket or on a, what do they call those things from the 1970s? Concorde. And you can arrive in New York before you left London and things like that. There are ways of expediting the trip, moving through space. Time is it's much more refined. So the Tzadik, the Eibusha says, you be careful not to get confused with the Eibusha when it comes to time. Because time is something where everybody has to surrender more. Time is a limitation and space is a limitation. And a physicist will tell you that time and space are connected. They're one and the same thing. And I'll be tighter, they're not the same, they're close. The Chassidus says that time comes before space. First Hashem sent time and then Hashem created space, but they're very connected. You cannot really have any creation that's limited to time without being limited to space. You can't really have a creation that's limited to space without being limited to time. But nevertheless, by the Tzadik you say kol zman, meaning to say, I don't control my time. But the Eibush is in charge of it, which is good enough for me. As opposed to space, where you feel like you're much more in control, and you have to say, I don't control my space. The Eibush controls my space. And the way, I guess you would explain this is, people get very, I think about the Rebbe. The Rebbe is and was a Jew, didn't waste a second. But the Rebbe used his time in the reality of time. To me, one of the most impressive things about the Rebbe is the following scene. The Rebbe used to make yechidus downstairs in shul. It was called yechidus, called general yechidus. A whole bunch of people came into a room. The Rebbe spoke to them a short sichim b'bracha. Then one by one, the Rebbe took their letters and gave them dollars, and the room was empty. And then another group came in. So one group was Chassan Kala, one group was Bar Mitzvah boys and girls, Bar Mitzvah and Bas Mitzvah. A third group was the guests that came for Yom Tov, and the fourth group was Bachrim. It was one of the few times that the Rebbe waited for us. If you walked into the second group, or the third group, or the fourth group, the Rebbe was sitting in a chair, in an empty room, and waiting for people to come in. And Rabbi Groner is nervous, she's always mentioned nervous. No, move fast, you're wasting the Rebbe's time. And the Rebbe said, Rabbi Groner very patiently, they're all here, can I start? And Rabbi Groner would say, yeah. And the Rebbe would say, they're all here, can I start? And the Rebbe would say, yeah. And they would say, they're all. So Rabbi Groner was nervous. The Rebbe's time was much more valuable than Rabbi Groner's time. Rabbi Groner's what about the Rebbe's time? The Rebbe had time if he had to wait for you. That was his job. But if he wasn't waiting for you, he didn't waste a split second. Rabbi Chadokov, who was a very, very holy Jew, used to say that the Rebbe would walk into his room after Fabrengen, and before the door was closed, he was holding a sefer. He says the Rebbe's care about not being Vatal Teda was not normal. He didn't waste a second. But when he had to waste time, it was part of his job, he had plenty of time to waste. Which is amazing. That for a person who's so precise with his time, not to be nervous about his time, that's Elokim Acheirim Panai calls man shani kayim. One of my favorite videos, and maybe I'm exaggerating a little. I've watched it many times and I'm sort of deciding what's going on in the video. But there's a video of a couple coming to the Rebbe from Cleveland with a child who could not speak. The child was 4 or 5 years old. And they come to the Rebbe and tell the Rebbe the child cannot speak, and the Rebbe gives him a bracha. And as all the miracles with the Rebbe, they all happen after you start walking away, the Rebbe calls you back. They're about to leave, and the Rebbe suddenly says to the little boy, you know Meidani, So the boy doesn't know what to say. So everybody around them, you watch the scene. There's the Rebbe, there's this poor beleaguered kid, and then there's all the helpers. Mama and Papa and Zayde and Baba, everybody's nervous. And Rabbi Groner, Kedake, Bakadish, and the Rebbe is calm as a whistle. You know Meidani? And the little kid, somebody tells for him, yeah. And the Rebbe says clear, say it now. But you could almost feel the power of the Kedusha to say it now. And the Rebbe puts his hand on his stender, relaxes. I got all day long. You take as much time as you need. The kid couldn't speak. So every syllable is taking effort. And 4 people are worried. The scene is so disturbing. The Rebbe wanted the kid to say Meidani, let him say it. His father's helping him, Rabbi Groner is helping him, Rabbi Groner is helping, his father's helping him. And they're making each other nervous. Wow. And the Rebbe's got his elbow on his stender. Say it now. And the kid says the whole Meidani. It takes him some time. It takes him a few seconds, but he says it. And then the Rebbe says to him, thank you for the lesson. Thank you for teaching me. The kid started to speak after that. That's pretty cool. But the way the Rebbe had time, for this I have time. I'm the busiest man in the world, but to this little boy to say Meidani, I got all the time. Whatever it takes. Say it now. You have to watch the video. That's type called Mancha Nikayim. Time is an entity we have very little control over. If you serve Hashem correctly, your time is God's time, so you don't waste any of it. But you're not nervous about it either. You use it exactly as the Eibishter wants. So for a tzaddik, you say, there's not allowed to be an avodah zarah when it comes to your time. You're not allowed to have thoughts that either I'm not using my time not efficiently enough or too efficiently. I use the time the way the Eibishter can really use it. And then about tshuva, you don't talk about zman, you talk about makam. Talk about space, which is much more tangible. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that's my interpretation. I will see you in a week. You are an amazing, amazing audience.